This video is created for informational purposes only. Everyone mentioned is treated with respect, and no harm or disrespect is intended. Viewer discretion is advised.
It was all a game, a very well orchestrated game, and in Dan's mind this was a legal case, and he had to destroy me totally, but I don't know why. I never did anything to him to incur all that hate and wrath.
This case did not start with a murder. It ended with one. At 5:30 in the morning on November 5th, 1989, in a house on Cypress Avenue in San Diego, a woman walked into a bedroom and fired 5 shots from a .38 caliber revolver. 2 people were dead before sunrise. The shooter was 41-year-old Elizabeth Broderick. The victims were her ex-husband, Daniel Broderick III, a prominent medical malpractice attorney, and his new wife, Linda Kolkena Broderick, who was 28 years old. Betty Broderick turned herself in that same day. She never denied pulling the trigger. But what America argued about for the next 3 decades wasn't whether she did it. It was why. And whether that why mattered. You're about to hear 10 facts from this case. Not theories, not dramatizations. Facts pulled from trial testimony, parole board hearings, and police evidence. You'll learn how Betty Broderick got into that locked house without breaking a single door. You'll hear the last words Daniel Broderick said while bleeding in his own bed, and you'll find out why parole boards twice decided she was still too dangerous to release, even decades later. We're counting down from number 10 to number 1. Each fact builds on the last, and by the time we reach the top, you'll understand exactly why this case still gets argued about in 2025. One more thing before we start. If this kind of detailed case breakdown is what you're here for, where we go through transcripts, timelines, and testimony instead of just surface-level coverage, do me a favor right now and subscribe. Hit that button, because there are maybe 5 other channels doing this level of research, and you just found one of them. Let's begin. Let's start at fact 10, the investment. Elizabeth Ann Bisceglia was born November 7, 1947, in New York. She met Daniel Broderick III when she was 18 at a football weekend at Notre Dame where Dan was a senior. They reconnected the following year when Dan moved to New York for medical school at Cornell University. Betty later told the Los Angeles Times that Dan was ambitious, intelligent, and funny, and she saw herself the same way. "He promised me the moon," she said. "The guy asked me to marry him every day for 3 years." They married in 1969. While Dan finished medical school and then went on to Harvard Law School, Betty worked and took care of their growing family. Their first daughter, Kim, was born while they were still living in Dan's small medical school dormitory. Betty hid her pregnancy from her co-workers at the elementary school where she worked. When Kim was born, she spent her first months in a dresser drawer instead of a crib. That's the part people forget. Betty Broderick didn't just marry Dan. She funded him. She worked while he studied. She raised the children while he built a career. The family eventually moved to Southern California so Dan could start his career as a medical malpractice attorney. The couple became regulars in San Diego's elite social scene, members of the La Jolla Country Club and Fairbanks Ranch Country Club. 4 children, a house worth over $1 million, country club dinners, charity events. From the outside, it looked flawless. From the inside, Betty would later say, she had become completely dependent. Dan controlled the money. Dan controlled the image. Dan controlled the future. She had spent 16 years building him up, and she had no identity outside of being his wife. That dependency, that imbalance, would matter later. A lot. Because in 1983, Dan hired a 21-year-old woman named Linda Kolkena as his legal assistant. She hadn't been to college, according to the Los Angeles Times, and she couldn't type. But that's not why Dan hired her. Not long after Dan hired Linda Kolkena in 1982 as his legal assistant, she'd been an airline stewardess before, Betty began to suspect he was having an affair. She was right. Eventually, Betty set Dan's custom suits on fire in their backyard. Dan got a court order forbidding Betty from entering their former home, which he was now sharing with Linda. Here's what made this more than just an affair. Linda wasn't a secret. She wasn't hidden. Dan had left Betty for Linda, and the entire San Diego social scene knew it. Betty later described it as public humiliation, being replaced in front of everyone who had watched her build that life. Dan always denied the affair at first, saying he and Linda didn't become involved until after he and Betty separated. But the timeline didn't support that, and Betty knew it. By 1985, the marriage was over. Dan filed for divorce, and what followed, according to the Los Angeles Times, became known as the worst divorce case in San Diego County. If you're still watching, I need to ask you something. You've made it this far, which means you're actually interested in how this case unfolded. So here's the thing. This video took days of research, going through trial transcripts and parole records to make sure every single detail is accurate. If that's the kind of content you value, take 2 seconds and hit subscribe. You're not just supporting this channel. You're telling YouTube to show this to people who care about real research instead of clickbait. Do that now, then we'll keep going. The divorce began in 1985. It wouldn't be finalized until 1989. And during those 4 years, Betty Broderick's anger stopped being just emotional. It became physical. Over the course of almost 5 years, the divorce proceedings became local legend. Betty vandalized their Coral Reef house, smashing glass doors and throwing a cream pie in the bedroom. She would scribble out Dan's name on court documents and write in God. Betty spray-painted the interior of their shared home, rammed her car into Dan's front door, left profane messages on his answering machine, and defaced court documents. Let me be clear about what this looked like in practice. In December 1985, Dan said Betty tore the wrapping paper off the children's Christmas presents, gouged a wall, broke a mirror, and slammed the front door open with such force that it pulled loose from its hinges and the doorknob punched a hole 2 inches in diameter in the wall. This wasn't one bad night. This was a pattern, a strategy almost. And here's what makes it more complicated. Dan tried to control Betty's behavior through the spousal support he was paying her. He instituted a system of fines, docking $100 if she used profanities, $500 if she entered his house. She'd lose $250 each time she trespassed on the property. For the biggest violation, taking their children without notifying him beforehand, Dan reportedly docked Betty's support check by $1,000. The divorce went through in 1986, though there were ongoing disputes about custody and alimony. Betty was eventually awarded monthly support of $16,000, but she felt this wasn't enough given her expenses. At one point she said, "I had nothing left to live on." But the money wasn't really the point. The children were. Dan ended up with sole custody of their children when the divorce was finalized in July 1986, with no visitation rights for Betty. She claimed there wasn't even a hearing, that Dan worked out a deal with the judge. Betty believed Dan had used his legal power to take everything from her: the house, the children, the life she'd built. And then, in one moment, her rage turned vehicular. Betty alleged that Dan had sold the Coral Reef home out from under her in February 1986, using a legal trick. Dan said he took action after she refused to sign the sale papers, twice. She promptly drove her Chevy into the front door of his new house, a butcher knife under her front seat. "My daughters Kim and Lee and I were in the kitchen fixing dinner when we heard a loud crash, almost like an explosion, and a racing engine at the front of the house," Dan said in a December 1986 court declaration. "We ran to the front door to see what it was and found that Elizabeth had crashed her Chevrolet Suburban into the house, knocking the front door off its hinges and out of the frame, and causing extensive damage to the brickwork on the outside and to the walls on the inside of the entry." Let me emphasize this. Her daughters, their daughters, were inside the house when Betty crashed the car into it. She spent 3 days at the San Diego County Mental Health Hospital after the crash. Here's why this fact matters so much. Betty Broderick would later claim in court that the murders were impulsive, that she snapped, that she didn't plan anything. But crashing a car into a house where your own children are eating dinner, with a butcher knife under the seat, doesn't look impulsive. It looks calculated, targeted, controlled. And after the crash, after the hospital, after the arrests and the fines and the restraining orders, Betty didn't stop. She kept calling. She kept leaving messages, hundreds of them. During this time, Betty left hundreds of obscene and profanity-laden messages on Dan's answering machine. Not dozens. Hundreds. Betty had a habit of leaving countless obscene messages on Dan's answering machine that he shared with Linda. Dan had the voicemails transcribed and fired back at Betty with a fine $100 for each vulgar word she used, deducted from her monthly support checks. Betty continued to leave messages on the couple's answering machine, having come up with creative, unprintable nicknames for both Dan and Linda. Some of these messages were played in court. Jurors heard them, and they weren't just angry. They were threatening. Betty's oldest daughter, Kim Broderick, took the stand during trial and testified that her mother often discussed her hatred of their father and that she would contemplate taking violent action against him. At one point, in a recorded call with her 11-year-old son, Danny, Betty admitted she could never change because I hate Daddy. She repeatedly called Linda a profane name, and when Danny begged her to stop using bad words, she said, "He's absolute scum. He's cheated and lied. You have no reason to be mad at me. I didn't cause any of this." Toward the end of the call, Betty told her son, "I wish Daddy would just die," and Linda get drunk and drive her car off a cliff. That's on tape. That's evidence. Danny Broderick was 11 years old, and he spent that call crying, begging his mother to stop. All you care about is your stupid money. You want everything. You want all the kids, all the money to get rid of Linda. And it's not going to work, Mum. That's what an 11-year-old had to say to his mother. But here's the part that makes it even more unsettling. By 1989, Dan and Linda weren't just afraid of Betty. They were preparing for her. We're now at Fact 5, the wedding. Dan and Linda got married on April 22, 1989. Linda had been concerned about Betty's behaviour and even urged Dan to wear a bulletproof vest to their wedding. Dan refused, although plainclothes security was employed. Linda also mentioned that Betty had joked about shooting them with multiple people. At Dan's bachelor party, Dan reassured a friend that Betty only cared about money and needed him alive for financial support. "Without me, there isn't any," Dan said. "She's not going to kill the golden goose." Think about that. Your wedding day is supposed to be one of the happiest moments of your life. Linda Kolkena spent hers asking her husband to wear body armour. Betty did not arrive, and the wedding proceeded without incident. 7 months later, both of them were dead. And here's where I need you to do something. If you've stayed with me this far, if you're actually thinking about this case and not just passively watching, leave a comment right now. Tell me which fact has shocked you the most. Because I read every single comment, and the best one gets pinned. I want to know what you're thinking. So pause for 5 seconds, drop a comment, then come right back. Now. Let's talk about how Betty Broderick got into that house. On November 5, 1989, around 5:30 in the morning, Betty Broderick used a key she had secretly taken from her daughter Kim's keyring to enter Dan and Linda's home at Cypress Avenue in San Diego. No forced entry, no broken windows, no kicked-in doors. She let herself in. Using a key she stole from her own child, Betty had taken the key to the house from one of her daughters. That's documented in trial testimony. This is the detail that changes everything. Because Betty Broderick's defense at trial was that she didn't plan this, that she went to the house intending to talk to Dan, maybe to kill herself, but not to kill them. Betty testified that when she went to Dan and Linda's house on the morning of the murders, she intended to speak with him and then commit suicide because she had no life left. But if you steal a key from your daughter days or weeks in advance, drive to someone's house before dawn, let yourself in quietly, and walk upstairs to a bedroom, that's not impulse. That's access. That's preparation. That's intent. And what happened next is exactly why parole boards have denied her release twice for over 30 years. Betty shot Daniel and Linda to death while they slept in their new Hillcrest area home. She emptied her 5-chamber 38 caliber Smith Wesson revolver. Linda was shot once in the back of the head and once in the chest. Daniel was shot once in the back. 2 other shots were fired, one hitting a bedside table and one hitting a wall. 3 of the bullets hit the sleeping couple, killing Linda instantly and Dan within a few minutes. But Betty didn't leave right away. Evidence presented at trial showed that Betty removed the phone and answering machine from Dan's bedroom so that he could not call for help. Medical evidence indicated that Dan had not died right away. He attempted to reach for the phone on his nightstand, but Betty quickly pulled the cord out of the wall. Betty admitted that Dan had spoken to her after she shot him. His last words were, "Okay, you shot me. I'm dead." Then Betty Broderick left the house, got in her car and drove away. After contacting her daughter Lee and Lee's boyfriend, Betty turned herself into the police that same day. She never denied pulling the trigger. She called her daughter Lee and claimed she had gone to the house to confront the couple and had planned to commit suicide if they wouldn't listen to her demands, but that she had been startled when Linda woke up and spotted her, so she shot them both in a panic. But the evidence didn't match that story. The stolen key, the hour she chose, the fact that she ripped the phone cord out of the wall while Dan was still alive. Lead Detective Terry DeGelder of the San Diego Police Department's Homicide Unit later said, "It was very cold-blooded and calculated." The case went to trial, and America couldn't agree on what they were looking at. Betty's first trial ended with a hung jury in November 1990, when 2 of the jurors held out for manslaughter, citing lack of intent. 10 jurors voted to convict her of murder. A mistrial was declared. Why couldn't they agree? The defense accused Dan of gaslighting Betty, sowing seeds of doubt to make her question her memory, perception, and sanity. Psychologists for the defense argued that Betty was depressed, explaining that her rage stemmed from her lack of any core identity, except what she took from Dan. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz, testifying for the prosecution, said Betty had histrionic and narcissistic personality disorders. The courtroom became a battlefield over one question: was Betty Broderick a battered woman who finally broke? Or was she a narcissist who couldn't accept losing control? Betty Broderick was retried a year later. At the second trial, which began December 11, 1991, she was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 years for illegal use of a firearm, the maximum under the law. Total, 32 years to life. Second-degree murder means the jury believed she intended to kill, but didn't find enough evidence of premeditated first-degree planning. But intention was still there. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. And more than 30 years later, parole boards have seen it too. Because Betty Broderick's story didn't end in 1991, it's still going. Betty Broderick has been incarcerated since the day she committed the murders. She is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. In January 2010, her first request for parole was denied by the Board of Parole Hearings because she neither showed remorse nor acknowledged wrongdoing. At the time, one parole commissioner told her, "Your heart is still bitter and you are still angry." She was again denied parole in January 2017. They denied parole for the longest term possible, 15 years. Deputy District Attorney Richard Sachs, who argued against parole at the 2017 hearing, said, "Betty Broderick is an unrepentant woman. She has no remorse and zero insight into the killings. She just basically said they drove me to do this." In those hearings, sources say, Betty repeatedly blamed the victims, banging her fist, calling Dan profane names, and apologising to his friends by saying, "I'm sorry you lost your drinking buddy." She will not be eligible again until January 2032, at which date she will be 84 years old. Even now, more than 3 decades after the murders, Betty Broderick describes herself as the victim. In a recent letter, she claimed she was gang-raped by the crooked courts, adding that her ex-husband used his power as a lawyer to threaten and intimidate her for years. Detective Terry DeGelder said, "To this day, she believes in her heart and in her mind that they deserve to die." That's fact 1. The obsession didn't end when Dan and Linda died. It outlived them. It's still there, in parole hearing rooms, in letters, in recorded testimony. Betty Broderick is still fighting the same battle she was fighting in 1989. Except now, the people she was fighting are gone, and she's the one behind bars. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If a marriage is supposed to make you feel safe, what do you call one that ends with a written warning, documented threats, and then 5 gunshots 7 months after a new wedding? Was this revenge? Or was it something that had been building for so long that it became inevitable? I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I will tell you this. The parole board looked at the same facts you just heard, and they decided she's still too dangerous to walk free. Now I want to hear from you. Which moment in this case hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and the most thoughtful one gets pinned. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. So subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want more cases where the perfect family image cracked wide open, there's a playlist on screen right now. Click it. Before you go, share this video. I mean it. There are people in your life who think they know this case because they saw a TV movie. They don't. Send them this. Let them hear what actually happened, backed up by court records and testimony. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.